As we near the end of our review series here, we get to one of my favorite Awaken mode tanks. And I actually just grabbed this one from the Monster Hunter out this year, believe it or not. That's the Tier 8 German premium heavy tank, the Asterion. This tank is a heavy tank version of the medium M48 Raumpanzer, or a heavy tank version of the Dreaddozer, since the reason the Asterion exists is to sell the ability of the Dreaddozer at any time. Since the Dreaddozer is a Hot Wheels licensed tank, it's not sold anymore. Much like the Arachnid we reviewed previously, they gave us a new form of the tank using the same model in order to have the ability still be available to everyone, and I really commend them for that personally. Much like the previous two tanks, however, the gun is going to be assumed to match the tank model since the name of the gun is just Asterion Axe, and it doesn't give us a caliber. So I'm going to say it's a 90mm, but you'll see it has characteristics of a 105mm gun with its 360 alpha damage. German 360 alpha heavies aren't known for their DPM unfortunately, and this thing is no different. With its 13-second base reload, its DPM value only reaches 1663. This is pretty lackluster and leaves a bit to be desired, but honestly, it's the worst part of the vehicle in my opinion. So if you can get past that fact, you have a pretty good tank ahead of you. The ammunition won't disappoint with its 218 standard AP rounds with 810 shell speed. That's pretty decent standard pen, but annoyingly slow shell speed. But you can just utilize this tank's premium APCR ammunition with a very good 282mm of penetration and much better 1100 shell speed. For its low DPM, it is nice to have good rounds that will more reliably give you damage with every shot. As for its gun handling, it doesn't start off sounding great with a base 0.4 accuracy and a decent 2.7 seconds of aim time, but honestly it felt good enough even without vert stabs, at least to me. What was really enjoyable about this tank is its 9 degrees of gun depression, and I always harp on how good gun depression is for just opening up maps to you. And although you have a big shovel on this tank, it is 9 degrees over the front. And speaking of that shovel, how thick is it? It's a whole 80mm of frontal spaced armor for you. This is up from the medium tank's 30mm shovel it has. This works wonders for added armor, and it's much more reliable as you would expect. And because this thing is a heavy tank now, you'd expect the armor to get thicker in other places too, right? Well, no. The armor compared to the medium actually only gets thicker in the places that this 200mm panel shows. These panels are all 180mm on the medium, meaning that this tank gets a 50mm thicker spaced armor shovel and a 20mm thicker cupola, and that's enough to make it a heavy now. And honestly, I do think so. The Patton already has a good turret face to begin with for a medium, so these thickened parts are its weaknesses. And the shovel in particular really helps out a lot to make you more bouncy. It would have been nice for the whole face to get 20mm added armor, especially the turret ring, but that's not what we got. Or better yet, if the bull itself was that 20mm as spaced armor, for some reason the bull is not part of the armor model whatsoever like you would expect with tanks like the Inferno having spaced armor with its lion. That would be another way they could buff this tank's armor further. You don't have much more HP to work with either in comparison to the medium this tank is modeled from. With this tank having a low 1500 HP, it's only 50 more HP than the medium. So I do think this tank would have been better with a bit more armor in the face and turret ring, and 100 more HP for sure. But for what it is now, it's still pretty good. And I felt it was reliable and good enough as a heavy tank classification. And it's really the shovel doing all the heavy lifting in that regard. Does a fat shovel make this tank super slow? Not really. At least to me it didn't feel super sluggish. It's got a good 35km/h top speed, but with 650 horsepower it only has an 11.07 power to weight ratio, which for a heavy isn't horrible, but it's not climbing hills very fast. Alongside its decent 24 track traverse speed, I didn't feel terribly slow with this tank, and wasn't finding myself being left behind on flanks we won, or chasing damage too much. I was mostly annoyed at that DPM more than anything. We'll quickly touch on its spotting capabilities because as a heavy you shouldn't expect much here. And it has 380 meters view range, which is average, so nothing to hate there. But what might surprise you is that its steel concealment isn't above 400 meters like almost all tier 8 heavies, and that's because it has the same still camo as the medium tank it shares the model with. Much like the Arachnid, I find this one really weird though. You're not going to be a stealthy heavy tank by any means, as the medium tank itself wasn't stealthy in the first place, but it's interesting to note at the very least. Overall, I really like the Asterion, but many players have told me that they think it's terrible, and I think it's that DPM and unupgraded turret face armor that makes them feel that way. 360 Alpha doesn't hit terribly hard either to mitigate the DPM, with at least a big punch when you do fire, like a 440 or 490 Alpha damage tank would, so it is a bit frustrating to trade with the enemies at times. But to me, that's its biggest weakness. The shovel and pen are great, and if this tank just got a second reload buff, I think it would become not just one of my favorite Halloween tanks, but one of my favorite tanks in the game. I really do like it, but that DPM does hold it back a lot. Of course, it being a Halloween tank means it can play in the Awaken mode. And when it awakens in that mode, it becomes again one of my favorite tanks. With that big shovel on the front, ramming into an enemy tank knocks them back and tumbling through the air. This is really fun to flip tanks with and beat them while they're down. This is great for pairing with tanks too, like the Bellerophon, to have them pull tanks into you, and then they go flying backwards and tumbling around. It's really a lot of fun, to be honest. The two Hot Wheels tanks are probably the most fun Awakened tanks out there for me, because they're just so simple and easy to use, with a large impact and fun factor to them that really stands out to me. They're not convoluted, and they are super enjoyable to utilize. So would I recommend this tank then? I would. It is available in the Monster Hunter app at the top tier, and it's in my top 3 picks for anybody alongside the Wraith and Bellerophon. It is dependent on your playstyle and what you already own for what you choose, but if you choose the Asterion, you're not going to regret it, at least I don't think. It's good fun in both modes, and what's not to like about a Patton with a big damn shovel attached? Before we get into the game I have for you, it's loadout time. We're rocking optics, loader, and vents for our equipment, and if that 0.4 base accuracy doesn't do it for you, feel free to knock off the optics for vert stabs. For our consumables, I have a premium repair kit, food rations, and premium med kit. And our commander ran with 6th Sense, rapid loading, steady aim, run and gun, snapshot, born leader, situational awareness, supply conservation, and controlled impact. And here we have a game for you on Grim Graveyard. Because I got this tank during the Monster Hunter up, these maps were in rotation. And honestly, they're pretty good. And I had really good games on most of them, or in most of my games where I got them. And this is obviously one of those cases. Now, it did take me a while to get a game like this, and that's it's not because this tank was performing poorly. Like, I was doing pretty damn well, quite consistently, getting a handful of 4K games in the two play sessions I had with this tank. And those base XPs were like 18 to 1900, which are typically ace tankers for tier 8s. But when a tank, it's funny how it works. When a tank is played by a lot of people, to get into that top 1%, kind of got to do very well. Or when a tank is played by little people, it's usually played by good players, and thus they raise the top 1% quite high, right? So I don't know if it was a case of people getting this tank from the Monster Hunter up. I don't think it was, because I didn't see too many of them. But I think it's a case of nobody's been playing this tank the past year, right? And even though ace tankers don't count the whole last year, it's just the pattern, right? So in order to get an ace tanker for you, I had to really perform. And we do so in this game. With our 9 degrees of gun depression and no artillery, we're just going to try and make use of this ridgeline. I believe we are top tier. There's a bog horror, so that tells us there's craft matchmaking. There's a tier 7 over there, so definitely not a tier 10 game. But those two heavy tanks right there are trying their best to get close to and utilize the non-destructible cover that's over there. The buildings on this version of the map aren't destructible. And it's one thing I do like about this map is, or this variant of the map, this variant of Prokhorovka, is the Revenant Panthers add a bunch of like extra like sort of rock-spaced armor everywhere. And the buildings are not destructible, so you have hard cover to sit behind on the one line. They're not great, but it is hard cover. Now, if you were paying attention there while I was yapping, we did hit that VK 100 one-piece cupola while our gunner was dead. So, to me, vert stabs isn't necessary. And we're just going to not miss a single shot on that VK 100 one-piece cupola, and we're going to take him out. And guess what? Another heavy tank decides to show up. Well, we'll use our 9 degrees of gun depression and miss our shot because I poorly aimed that. But that's fine. We're doing spotting damage as well, despite our 380 meters view range. And this is why I put optics on heavy tanks. If they don't need vert stabs, I don't need it. When a game like this happens where my light tank's in the back of the map, I can take advantage of the fact that I'm spotting these tanks for my team. I don't think I would have spotted that T-32 at this distance without it, you know. It's just, there's a reason why my setup is what it is for most tanks, and that's because it's just the most optimal setup for, like, most scenarios, right? If a tank needs vert stabs, though, optics is what I do usually kick the bucket for the vert stabs, but 0.4 accuracy is good enough nowadays. 0.42, you know, with the Inferno, definitely felt much worse and a bit different. But that's also just because if you're in a heavy tank too and you're slower, your dispersion, like, your reverse speed doesn't pick up too much speed, you're not going too fast. You can pull up to the ridge slower with armor. It's just a whole, like, it's just good enough without vert stabs. We've done 3,600 damage now in this position. We are losing by 1, but that's fine because I'm about to take out this bog horror, or at least so I think. Yeah, I'm gonna hit one of the. I don't even know what I hit. I think I hit a gravestone that was enough to negate my APCR and not let it go through. But he can't do anything because if he turns, he gives it his sides to my teammates because he's quite large. So he has to just hope I either miss again and he can get some shots at me, but he's dead. So now it's 9-9 and we've done 3,700 damage. We've done 2,200 spotting. And our light tank is still behind my tank destroyer friend over there. So, yay for non-spawning light tanks. I mean, it worked out in our favor, right? We've done 4,000 damage now with 3 kills. And now this is where I was starting to get really excited because this is the kind of situation I would end a game in. 3 kills, 4k damage. Sometimes I wouldn't normally have 2,600 spotting, maybe 1,000 spotting or most likely tracking, but I'm getting really antsy here going, this is the one. This is the one. I want to push, but I'm waiting for this this Bellerophon or whatever it was to die to my left, and I'm getting spotting off him. I want to rush out in the middle here now to get to their side of the train tracks and start sniping the hill. There's still stuff back there though. And the SU-130PM dies on his way leaving. We're still getting spotting damage, which is great. And then we notice one of the things that potentially shot at us, probably the thing that did shoot at us. We got one shot into him and then he immediately dies. And I think I mentioned this with the 360 alpha comparison to 440s and 490s, but with the low DPM and with the way the game is right now, you either need a tank with great DPM or good alpha damage to like keep up. Because look at that, I hit for 320 with my 360. If I hit for 420 with a 440, I would be just that much more rewarding, you know. And then when something dies while you're on reload, it's like whatever, I got a big shot in because of big damage. And 360's in a weird spot where it doesn't feel that way. But we were able to, despite not pushing out as quickly as I wanted to, do 5,700 damage and over 3,000 spotting damage in a heavy tank, and that gave us 2,500 base XP. So I think we got our ace, right? I spent far too long. I spent an entire play session and then some on this tank trying to get that ace tanker. I had a few games saved up that were good enough to showcase the tank, but here we were able to utilize 9 degrees of gun depression. We got some block damage. We got spotting even, which is funny to me. And then most importantly, we got our ace tanker. Again, I really like this tank. I really like. I kind of want to go and play the medium tank version of it too to see how big of a difference it really is. This thing it's just nice though. The penetration's good. 9 degrees is great. The cupola buff is surprisingly helpful. The shovel is just amazing. 80 millimeters of space armor. What more could you ask for? I'm not sure, but I hope you enjoyed watching today's review. That's all for me. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.